Okay, folks, we're going to look towards getting started. And first off, we want to welcome all of you here today. We have been absolutely thrilled by the amount of people who have shown interest in being able to access the information through the Parent Intervention Program. This is a program that's delivered almost monthly throughout the province to parents of young people who are experimenting with, or using with problematic signs, alcohol or drug use. So we're thrilled to be able to continue to deliver this program to parents and caregivers across the province today. And so we really welcome you here, and we thank you very much for joining us today. My name is Alana Sigurdsson, and I am a youth counselor with the Addictions Foundation with the pleasure of working in the River East Transcona School Division.
Hello, my name is Jeremy Hennessy, and I'm a youth community-based counselor, and I am working out of McDonald's Youth Services in a partnership.
So today what we're doing is we're taking a program that is delivered really frequently throughout the province, and we are going to try to do it virtually. Both Jeremy and I are really used to doing this with a room full of parents and caregivers, so we are currently looking at a blank wall, and that's really different for us as counselors. So bear with us, I think, with some of those pieces, because we are certainly used to being able to interact and chat with people. I think one of the things that is key to this is there's a lot of sort of heavy information that's shared, and some of it can feel pretty heavy emotionally. So we're going to do the best we can in terms of delivering that information. If we were in a regular parent intervention program, we certainly have a lot more opportunity to be able to talk through and process some of those pieces. So I strongly encourage you to connect with people in your life to kind of process some of the information that we're sharing today. What you're going to notice is this parent intervention program is being split over 2 sessions. The first session is really focused on challenging perspectives. So how we're looking at things, how we're approaching things, a context that we can use differently to approach young people who are using. The second part of the webinar is using this perspective and looking at some actual skills and approaches that we can use with young people to hopefully encourage them to consider making some changes. There is not, unfortunately, a one-size-fits-all prescription or recipe that we can give you that's going to work for all youth. I am assuming, because so many people have signed up to watch this webinar today, you're already working really hard with your young person and trying to encourage them to make changes in their life. You're concerned about some of the decisions that they're making, so you're already working hard. I want to make it really clear that this is not about you working harder or not doing enough. Today, and the second part of the webinar is very much about looking at how could you consider doing some things differently to see if you can get some different outcomes. So those are some of the pieces that we want to drive home. This is not about working harder. This is about considering working differently to be able to reach your young person. And keeping in mind that all of you have tuned in today because you love your child, you love a person that you are working with, and you want to be able to help them in the best possible way, and we really, really appreciate you taking that time for your young person. There is opportunity to ask questions throughout the webinar. If you look to the right-hand side of your screen, there's a spot where you can type in questions. At the end of the webinar, we'll respond to those questions, and if for some reason there are lots of them and we can't respond to everything, we'll email you back with that information. I think all of you would have also seen in the welcome message that no one can see that you're watching this, and no one can see that you're asking questions aside from Jeremy and I. So just knowing that your anonymity is absolutely protected by being part of this webinar. So without further ado, we'll get started.
One piece I would add as well is Alana mentioned that this is a program that is run often in the community, nearly monthly. While I do believe we're going to be presenting you guys with a lot of really useful information and some skills and tools you guys can try out, I would encourage people to attend that in-person group if possible at some point in the future as a refresher. There's always a little bit of a different flavor depending on the facilitators, and I don't want to downplay how important and impactful meeting other folks and hearing other folks' stories and kind of having that group interaction can be for us to sort of normalize some of the things that are going on for us and in our families, right? So just something to check out in the future. If you see this being promoted anywhere, feel free to do the in-person group. Okay, so to start us off, one of the things we'll look at is kind of what are we doing here? Why are we here? What's this about? A bit of the purpose to the group. So first off, to introduce everyone to AFM Youth Services philosophy and working with youth, a bit of a crash course in how we kind of work with youth, our approach, our perspective, kind of like a counseling 101. Secondly, to strengthen perspective or strengthen participants' perspective, understanding of a youth's alcohol or other drug use or gambling, and how that affects everyone. A person's use isn't just about them, it affects other folks around them too. Thirdly, to introduce parent response strategies, parent and caregiver response strategies that may help your youth in making some different decisions, maybe some healthier choices. Basically any intervention that might improve the situation a little bit. Okay, so 4, to reintroduce some principles of self-care. As caregivers, we need to be healthy to do this kind of work and to be present. As I'm sure some of you have experienced already, a person's use can strain individuals, can strain relationships between partners, can strain families. So we need to be able to focus on ourselves a little bit to kind of be in a healthy spot to assist our young person in their journey. Lastly, to decrease isolation of parents and caregivers by providing some information about available resources in the community, online supports, and providing that network of mutual encouragement and support. So as parents and community members, we're not alone in this. As Alana mentioned before, this group runs nearly monthly. I've never encountered it being canceled or anything like that. A lot of demand for this group, so you're definitely not alone in this. And as Alana mentioned too, to sort of look at this as a bit of it being like a beginning, starting point. Not every piece of information throughout this group is going to hit with everybody. Something I've found as a facilitator of this group for 10 years is that different components of this program impact me and make sense to me at different times in my life and depending on who I'm working with. So I'd encourage people to sort of go with the buffet approach, take what you want and leave the rest. But feel free to revisit some of this information in the future or even connect with your sort of local AFM counselor to process some of this stuff at different points.
So one of the things that we often get asked about by young people, especially when we're working in classrooms or in community groups, is why would I come and see someone from the Addictions Foundation? I'm not addicted. And that is a very fair point. Our response always kind of is tailored around looking at the variety of services that the Addictions Foundation offers. And when we're talking about working with youth, a lot of that work is looking at prevention, looking at decision making, looking at choices, looking at risks, and trying to adapt information in a way that a young person will accept that information. But one of the things that we do often talk about is what addiction actually looks like and what the youth's perspective is on what addiction looks like. So from the guiding principle that we work from is that addiction is an unhealthy relationship between a person and a mood or mind-altering substance, experience, or event which contributes to life problems. So when we're describing this to a young person and when we're looking at it as a parent or a caregiver, what is key here is the relationship. It's not that alcohol or weed or prescription medications are evil, and if we just got rid of them, then we wouldn't have any issues. The issue is that people are developing relationships with these substances. Again, I'd love to be able to tell you how that happens, how some people can drink or use, some young people can drink or use weed and have very little consequence attached to it, where others start using and everything starts to spiral and the outlook of their situation looks really, really different. There's no way to kind of tell exactly what makes the difference between those two young people. But I think as parents and caregivers and as people who work with young people, it's looking at what, rather than taking the focus off, rather than putting the focus on the drug, we want to take the focus off the drug and looking at the motive for using. Why is someone interested in using? What kind of things is it helping in their particular life? What are the good parts about using? What are the crummy parts about using? Those are a lot of the conversations that we're having with young people. It's also looking at if a drug is a drug is a drug. So sometimes we'll hear, no, not sometimes, every day we'll hear, it's just weed, what's the big deal? It's natural, everyone's doing it. I feel like I could be very, very rich if I had taken like even a dime for every young person who has kind of said that to me over the years. But it's not about the drug. It is about the relationship, and that's how we want to approach it. Sometimes parents will get caught up in, at least it's not this, like at least they're not using heroin, at least they're not injecting, at least. It's looking at what is happening between that young person and the substance or behavior that they're participating in. The other part about addiction that's really important, and that's why we're extra keen to have you guys with us today, is that when we're looking at someone considering making changes about their alcohol and drug use, it's not just about that particular person. We know that addiction affects the entire family. We know that when someone has a struggle with alcohol or drug use, it affects the entire family. When someone's personality starts to change, they start making different decisions, everybody in that family is affected. If we look at the other side of it and we're challenging a young person to consider making some changes, it also means that family members often need to consider making some changes in the ways that they interact with that young person, in some of the guidelines that their households might have in terms of rules. So it's very much looking at the entire family supporting each other to consider things looking different. To also put people at ease, I would say the bulk of the young people that we are meeting with every day are not addicted. They are making some not so amazing decisions all the time related to alcohol or drug use, but not at the point where we would consider them dependent on use. So some people can sigh a breath of relief there by hearing that. But this information and providing this information to as many people as possible, youth, adults, teachers, coaches, our communities, is so important so that we can best support our youth.
One thing I'd add about the whole concept of addiction too is from doing classroom presentations and various things in the community, there's a lot of stigma attached to the word addiction. I think that's changed somewhat, but I mean there's still a long way to go on that. So something I would say to a lot of folks is when you think of, say you Google imaged addiction, or you plugged it into YouTube or something like that, the images that we get back are often not really representative of what's really going on, right? Like you Google image it and you're going to get a picture of like a moody teenager in a hoodie leaning against a brick wall in a black and white photo. I'm sure that exists, but that isn't the reality. Addiction doesn't really care about gender, race, age, background. It hits all walks of life. So what I like people to sort of remember is that, yeah, it doesn't affect just one pocket of people or one area of the city or anything like that. This is all over the place, and a lot of people are impacted by substance use.
So what we're going to do in terms of sort of starting to kind of have that conversation about shifting perspectives is we're going to show you a short video. It's about 5 minutes. And this is something that we very often will show in our parent intervention programs. We'll also show it if we're working with community leaders or teachers and sort of talking about what substance use looks like.
What causes, say, heroin addiction? This is a really stupid question, right? It's obvious. We all know it. Heroin causes heroin addiction. Here's how it works. If you use heroin for 20 days, by day 21, your body would physically crave the drug ferociously because there are chemical hooks in the drug. That's what addiction means. But there's a catch. Almost everything we think we know about addiction is wrong. If you, for example, break your hip, you'll be taken to a hospital and you'll be given loads of diamorphine for weeks or even months. Diamorphine is heroin. It's in fact much stronger heroin than any addict can get on the street because it's not contaminated by all the stuff drug dealers dilute it with. There are people near you being given loads of deluxe heroin in hospitals right now, so at least some of them should become addicts. But this has been closely studied. It doesn't happen. Your grandmother wasn't turned into a junkie by her hip replacement. Why is that? Our current theory of addiction comes in part from a series of experiments that were carried out earlier in the 20th century. The experiment is simple. You take a rat and put it in a cage with 2 water bottles. One is just water, the other is water laced with heroin or cocaine. Almost every time you run this experiment, the rat will become obsessed with the drugged water and keep coming back for more and more until it kills itself. But in the 1970s, Bruce Alexander, a professor of psychology, noticed something odd about this experiment. The rat is put in the cage all alone. It has nothing to do but take the drugs. What would happen, he wondered, if we tried this differently? So he built Rat Park, which is basically heaven for rats. It's a large cage where the rats would have colored balls, holes to scamper down, plenty of friends to play with, and they could have loads of sex, everything a rat about town could want. And they would have the drugged water and the normal water bottles. But here's the fascinating thing. In Rat Park, rats hardly ever use the drugged water. None of them ever use it compulsively. None of them ever overdose. But maybe this is a quirk of rats, right? Well, hopefully, there was a human experiment along the same lines, the Vietnam War. 20% of American troops in Vietnam were using a lot of heroin. People back home were really panicked because they thought there would be hundreds of thousands of junkies on the streets of the United States when the war was over. But a study followed the soldiers home and found something striking. They didn't go to rehab. They didn't even go into withdrawal. 95% of them just stopped after they got home. If you believe the old theory of addiction, that makes no sense. But if you believe Professor Alexander's theory, it makes perfect sense. Because if you're put into a horrific jungle in a foreign country where you don't want to be, and you could be forced to kill or die at any moment, doing heroin is a great way to spend your time. But if you go back to your nice home with your friends and your family, it's the equivalent of being taken out of that first cage and put into a human rat park. It's not the chemicals, it's your cage. We need to think about addiction differently. Human beings have an innate need to bond and connect. When we are happy and healthy, we will bond with the people around us. But when we can't, because we're traumatized, isolated, or beaten down by life, we will bond with something that gives us some sense of relief. It might be endlessly checking a smartphone. It might be pornography, video games, Reddit, gambling, or it might be cocaine. But we will bond with something because that is our human nature. The path out of unhealthy bonds is to form healthy bonds, to be connected to people you want to be present with. Addiction is just one symptom of the crisis of disconnection that's happening all around us. We all feel it. Since the 1950s, the average number of close friends an American has been steadily declining. At the same time, the amount of floor space in their homes has been steadily increasing. To choose floor space over friends, to choose stuff over connection. The war on drugs we've been fighting for almost a century now has made everything worse. Instead of helping people heal and getting their life together, we have cast them out from society. We've made it harder for them to get jobs and become stable. We take benefits and support away from them if we catch them with drugs. We throw them in prison cells, which are literally cages. We put people who are not well in a situation that makes them feel worse and hate them for not recovering. For too long, we've talked only about individual recovery from addiction. But we need now to talk about social recovery, because something has gone wrong with us as a group. We have to build a society that looks a lot more like Rat Park and a lot less like those isolated cages. We are going to have to change the unnatural way we live and rediscover each other. The opposite of addiction is not sobriety. The opposite of addiction is connection.
Hello. Thank you very much for letting us show you that video. We had a bit of a technical glitch there for a second. So that is one of my favorite videos, and I show that to a lot of people, young folks, people in schools, staff, other folks in the community, parents, caregivers. But whenever I show it, I always point out one fact that, or not fact, but part that I think sort of stands out a little bit as something that kind of makes my BS detector go off, is the part where they're talking about the Vietnam War part where folks have gone away, they're using a substance heavily in a very traumatic, very stressful situation, then returning back to their home country and everything's just fine, they just slide back into their old life. I don't think that is probably entirely accurate. I think maybe for sure the theme of the video holds true, but my guess is that some of those folks who were using something came back and maybe jumped substances, went to something more acceptable, socially acceptable, or one of the challenges too is that stats and record keeping from the 60s is substantially different than what it's like now. So my guess is that maybe some of the challenges that those folks had when they came back wasn't exactly captured. So just something to sort of bear in mind when we're taking a look at the content of this video.
With this video, a lot of parents and caregivers really find it very powerful. And that piece about the opposite of addiction being connection, I think is where we come from when we're working with a young person and when we're working with families, is looking at if our basic human need, or one of our basic human needs, is to connect with people, connect with things we enjoy, connect with activities we enjoy, feel useful and productive in our world, if that's something that's a basic human need for us, and for whatever reason that need isn't being met, we can then understand why young people or adults become connected to alcohol or drug use. It's something that's filling that void for them. And I think one of the things, sometimes when we do this group with parents, they get a little bit nervous about the reference in the video about the horrific jungle. No, your children do not live in a horrific jungle. But I think what comes out of that is that we often don't know what a young person's perspective is on situations. I am constantly amazed by some of the things that young people will share with me that were really big turning points in their life, of situations that happened that I bet you nobody noticed were significant for that young person, but it was something that stayed with them, and they continued to kind of mold part of the decisions in their life based on that particular situation. So it's important to understand our young person's perspective. It's important to continue to do everything we can to make connections with them, because they will stand the best chance of making a decision to do something different if they feel connected and if they feel like they have other options. So looking as parents at how are we connecting with our young person? What does that look like exactly? How are we spending time? We know that society is ever evolving and things are always changing, and it probably has become more difficult than ever to connect in some ways. And I certainly don't want to completely throw our technology under the bus, but a lot of people are very connected through their phones right now, right? And it's an easy distraction. When we have a bit of downtime, it's easy to pick it up and kind of get lost in time. And you often will see situations even out in public where people are all sitting together, but everyone's on their phone. No one's sort of chatting and interacting and connecting. We know we can't connect in the same way by doing that over technology. The best way to connect is in person. So just making sure that we are taking that time with our young people to connect. That is what all of us are looking for, is that connection. If that connection isn't there, then we're kind of creating that situation where alcohol or drugs could seem like a good idea to a young person. The other thing from the video, just to sort of spend a little bit of time on, is that piece where they talk about putting people in jails and then sort of talking about how awful they are and all the bad decisions they've made, and expecting when they come out that they'll be a completely different person, completely reformed, right? And we know that there's often cases when there isn't programs available, when a person is incarcerated, that things will come out the same or worse than they were before, right? So we're thinking about that context as well when we're talking about young people, and I want you to think about young people who in your life who are constantly getting in trouble at school or in their classrooms or at home, and thinking from their perspective in terms of what is the messages they're getting from the people around them. Are they feeling connected? Are they feeling heard? Now, that's not to say we let them off the hook on every sort of not so awesome thing they do, but if they're not feeling like they're connected to anyone, it's going to be tough to ask them to pull away from their alcohol or drug use, which is serving a need for them. So again, really find that this video is very powerful. Anytime we show it to parents or teachers or people who are working with youth in particular, there's always some awesome conversation that comes out of it, of sort of a perspective shift in terms of what we're looking at when we're looking at addiction, and how all of us have a role to play in making it easier for people to connect with each other.
One other thing to add is that we did get a bit of feedback that the video was choppy for some folks, either audio or the visual. If that was the case, I'd encourage you just plug into YouTube everything we know about addiction is wrong, or everything you know about addiction is wrong, and that animated video will come up. In addition, there is a larger TED Talks on the same topic, so check it out if you're interested.
So we're going to look at some key messages when we're sort of looking at working with young people. We're looking at trying to encourage them to make change. We're trying to look at what our responsibility is in the decisions that they're making. So one of the first messages we want to sort of share is that you're not responsible for the decisions your children make. And I know that that's a tough one, especially for parents, because often they feel responsible when their young person is making decisions that aren't awesome. So think about when your young person was quite young, how many times you said to them, don't touch the stove, don't touch my coffee, it's hot. So probably some of the time they didn't touch the stove or they didn't try to grab at your coffee, but some of the times they didn't, even though you gave them a warning that they were going to get their hands burnt, right? Even though you did everything you could as a parent, they still decided to touch that hot coffee or touch that hot stove. You've talked to them about don't drive too fast down the hill on your bike. You might fall, you might get hurt, and then you've got a little one who's at the bottom of the hill crying their eyes out. You've warned them about the possible consequences of what could happen, but they make that decision anyway. So it is important that we recognize we want to control our kids. Let's not let's not say we don't, but we can't control them, and we are not responsible for their decisions. What we can control, though, is how we respond to them. And that is going to be a thread that you're going to see through this entire webinar, is how we are responding to our young person and how our responses can help to influence change for a young person. You cannot change them and you cannot control all their choices. So one of the pieces that is key here is understanding what their motivation is. And this kind of goes back to that connection. This goes back to having strong communication with your young person. Is your young person looking for a new experience? They've heard about it, they're curious, they're testing boundaries, they are wanting to experiment, they're wanting to do exactly what you said for them not to do, which is sometimes a possibility. Or are they running to something? Are they running from something? Are they feeling a certain way, or are they struggling with their self-esteem? Are they feeling anxious when they go to school every day, and that's some of the reasons why they are feeling like alcohol or drugs is a good solution for them? Change is a process, and I'm going to assume many of us today are very much in the same boat. I would love to eat healthy all the time and exercise every day. And I know all of the reasons why that would be an extremely good move for me, for my family. I'd be a good role model for my kids. But my goodness, that is easier said than done some days, right? There are the days where you order the deep and delicious cake. That is exactly what I did last night, which does not fall into any food group. There are days when the last thing you want to do is exercise. So when we're getting into a new routine where we're trying to do things different, we're trying to do things perhaps in a healthier way, it is a process. It's not like we don't always know the information, and oftentimes we know exactly what we need to do. We just might not have the motivation yet to do it. We may not feel confident we can do it yet. So recognizing for sure with young people as well that change is very much a process. Change is most likely to happen when a young person sees a problem that concerns them. This piece is so key. There's so many conversations I've had with parents about their young person failing classes or having to repeat certain classes or getting kicked off a sports team due to their use or ending up in trouble with the law related to their use. And the parents are horrified and they're terrified and they're worried about the impact these decisions are going to have on their life moving forward. But sometimes that's not enough for a young person, right? There needs to be a consequence, or there needs to be something that happens that's meaningful to them. We're all very, very different. And it will take different things in our life to kind of spur us to consider doing something different. So again, from our perspective, we're looking and thinking, oh my goodness, you're failing these classes, you're not going to graduate on time. But from a young person's perspective, they may be looking at that very differently, where staying an extra semester isn't a big deal to them. The other part about a young person recognizing that there's an issue that means something to them is they also need to feel confident they can do something about it. There's lots of times where I will be meeting with a youth and they will be able to tell me exactly where the struggles are in their life. They will tell me exactly the negative impact that alcohol or drugs is having on their life, but they have no confidence that they are able to do something different about it. They feel like, I'm in too far, I can't do anything different. So I don't want to get people's hopes up by saying I'm going to do something different when I don't feel confident that I can do that. That piece is really key when you are talking with your youth, is making sure that they understand that there are lots and lots of supports to help them and they don't have to do this piece on their own. Resistance to change is normal. So think about, I'm going to kind of give an example that I think a lot of people can probably relate to, is think about changes that happen at work. And we know that there's lots of different things that happen through our work where people are, sometimes we're part of deciding about the change, and other times we are getting a memo saying, this is how we're going to do this now. Most times people feel uncomfortable and anxious and sometimes angry when they are being asked to make a change when they've had no input into it, or they've had some input and they don't like what the outcome looks like. So that resistance to change is really a normal response for people to have. And sometimes it's the easiest first response as well, is if I just fight it right from the beginning, even though I might be thinking about making this change myself, it gets my parents off my case. So that piece I think is also key. Limits, consequences, choices, encouragement, and support are all key factors that increase an interest in change. So anytime we all as human beings need to have limits and consequences, it helps to keep us accountable, right? As parents, it's always been our job to kind of create those limits within our homes, right? What are the values that our family operates from? What are the expectations of our family? What are the behaviors that are considered totally okay? And what are those that we're not so okay with as a family? So making those really clear with people, but it helps to give us some accountability. It also gives us a guide. And think about, we'll go back to kind of using an example about work again. If you didn't have to be there on time every day and dressed fairly professionally and, no one would kind of keep track, it would be easy to let things slip, right? All of us as human beings need some limits to some of the things we're doing. The other thing that I think is really big here is when we're working with the young people is being able to offer them choices, right? Rather than always coming in with the, I'm your mother and I said so, as the response to something, is giving them some choices in terms of what the consequence might look like or what their options are related to a decision that they've made. If I am constantly only focusing on the negative that that young person is doing, the minute I start speaking, they are likely going to tune me out. Or in the case of a teenager, they're going to roll their eyes, walk away, and probably slam the door, right? So we want to engage them in some of the decision-making that's happening related to their alcohol and drug use. We want to give them choices, and we really want to give them encouragement and support. Those pieces are key. We also want to include sort of empathic communication. We want to invite them into conversations, and we want to negotiate what some of those choices look like as well. Those pieces are really key. The last key message is that self-care is a vital change resource, and we're going to speak a bit more in detail about self-care later on this morning. But we need to be prepared for a marathon. Helping our young person to consider making changes and to consider doing things differently is not going to be in a sprint. There isn't an easy one-size-fits-all answer that we can provide to you today. This is likely you needing to prepare for the long road here. And I'm not saying crazy long, but I'm saying we're probably not going to have this solved by next month. So it's preparing yourself in that way, and the only way you can do that is making sure that you are also really taking care of yourself. You are getting enough rest, you're eating well, you're relying on your supports, you're taking breaks, you're doing things for yourself. Parents are notorious for putting their young person first, and obviously we do that because we love them, but we also need to be taking care of ourselves, and that piece is going to be key as you're helping to support your young person.
So in working with youth and families over the years, we've identified a number of common themes that seem to kind of be present. Sometimes this is called painful family system, if you're looking at maybe family therapy or systems. While we're going through this, take note of any of these that apply to your experience or your family. My guess is some of these things are going to ring true. So first off, deny. So deny that there's anything wrong. This could be either by the youth or the parent. Don't talk. So don't talk to each other. Don't talk to anyone outside the family about what's going on. In short, keep it a secret. Johnny's not at family dinner because he's really hungover from his big party the night before. We just don't mention it. We don't bring it up. And that silence can allow that harmful behavior to continue. Don't feel. This is a challenging one. Feelings can be really threatening. Once we kind of name it and we kind of recognize that we are experiencing something, we're acknowledging to ourselves that we need to kind of deal with this. And if we've got to deal with it, that is a challenging spot to be in. That can be kind of scary. Next up, don't trust. So a lack of safety and consistency in the home and in the relationship with the youth can create an atmosphere where trusting others becomes really challenging. We start to question everything that our young person does and says, and even when we get a reply, we don't trust any of the answers. Also, we start to kind of doubt other people in our lives. They're having interactions with our youth, family members, friends, grandparents, people at school, things like that, and no one's mentioning anything about anything being up with the kid. So we start feeling like maybe our perception is off. How is no one else seeing this? We start to getting to the point of not trusting our own judgment. And isolation. So this is especially stand out right now, keeping all those problems within the family. In this current climate where people are not really going out, we're kind of self-isolating, everyone's in the home. I'm getting lots of calls and lots of interactions with parents who are having a lot of challenges with their youth because it's been a long time since they have spent this much time around their youth, and they're noticing some of these points coming up. So by isolating and sort of putting up those walls, we cut ourselves off from those other supports, like family members and friends, counselors, teachers, other resources in the community. We sort of throw all those walls up and we end up protecting the problem, allowing this behavior to continue.
And I think it's key to kind of recognize that many families operate on these rules without even knowing, right? Like it's just something that sort of happens over time, and it sort of evolves over time, trying to hide what's going on, wondering if we're making too big a deal. But I think when we kind of put them out there like this, it kind of, a lot of families kind of sit back and go like, yeah, that's exactly some of the things that I've been doing, but I didn't even notice. So it's again, recognizing you're not alone in this. There's very, very common themes that tend to happen for a lot of parents and a lot of families. One of the other tools we use with young people very regularly, and something that we always share also with parents, is looking at where we're coming from in terms of looking at a person's alcohol or drug use. So the framework we use is the levels of involvement, and recognizing through using the levels of involvement that we don't automatically end up one day and a young person is drinking or smoking weed every day, right? There's typically a process that a young person goes through. So when we're using this tool with young people, what we're doing is we're trying to engage them in terms of where do you feel like you fall on this continuum? We explain what the different levels look like and where do you feel like you fall. Teenagers in general just love to take risks. It's part of, like, it really is part of the awesome part about being a teenager. I think about some of the things that I did when I was much younger, and I'm kind of grateful I did them because I would be way too scared to do it right now, right? They feel like they're invincible. They feel like they can do anything and nothing bad is going to happen. So there's pieces of that that are so awesome. And then there's pieces of that that can be so dangerous, and that's the part that gives us as parents gray hairs, right, is looking at that particular piece. So we use this as an engagement tool. We use it as a way of kind of showing that things don't happen overnight, and if you are at a particular level, you have an opportunity to consider doing something differently prior to it becoming more problematic. So some of the things that are key for parents when we're looking at levels of involvement, though, is as a family, what are our values around alcohol and drug use? And oftentimes, I find in families, it's looking at specific substances. What does our family have to say about alcohol use? What does our family use of alcohol look like? What practices does my youth see me engaging in when I am drinking or using another drug? What are the messages that I have given them, and what are they seeing in our family? What I find a lot of times too is that parents have had conversations sort of along the road related to alcohol and drug use, but oftentimes the young person is unclear in terms of what the rules are at home. Lots of times I'll have young people say, well, you know, mom and dad are okay with me drinking, but they're not okay with me using weed, right? So it's kind of giving that mixed message to a young person who is really interested in testing their individual boundaries and taking some risks. It makes that message very confusing for them. We want to make sure that we're clear as parents with our young people about what our expectations are at home, what the information is about alcohol and drug use, and the piece around talking with a young person about alcohol and drug use begins when they're super young. Like, we're talking 6, 7, 8 years old, that conversation can start. And that conversation continues as a young person is developing and as they're having different experiences in their life. So what is important is for parents to kind of challenge themselves about what are our family values around alcohol and drug use, and what have I done to communicate that to my young person? So when we're looking at what the different levels of involvement are, we're going to look at some images here. So there are, and this sometimes shocks young people, there are some young people who just choose not to use at all for many different reasons. So we're looking at them being very involved in a lot of different things in their lives, and that alcohol and drugs is just not part of that equation. So it's a person who's not using. Then we have people who are using irregularly. Right? So it's random, their pattern of use is random, or it's infrequent. Experimental users will fall into this too, where they had an opportunity to try something and so they took it, but are unlikely to do it again for quite a long time, either because they didn't like it, they had a bad experience, or it's not something that kind of fits for them right now. When someone is irregularly using, there's little to no evidence of any consequences associated with their use. And you'll notice when we're looking at these images, it's not really impacting any other part of their life as well. And that piece is key. When we're looking at regular use, we're looking at someone who has a pattern of use. So that pattern can look really differently. So the pattern can be a daily user, the pattern could be a weekly user, the pattern could be a monthly user. It really looks different for different people. So when you notice on this image where it shows AOD, that's an abbreviation for alcohol and other drug use. So it's kind of showing where, in order for us to make room for someone to use alcohol or drugs with a regular pattern, some other things need to be rejigged, right, if that's something that we're using more frequently. A person who's regularly using is actively seeking that involvement as part of their lifestyle. So it might be someone, if we're talking about adults, it might be, or young people, when they get their paycheck. That's the time that they go out with their buddies and they have some drinks or they use something else, and then they kind of step away from it again for a couple of weeks. This is an opportunity. When you see your young person using, where there's kind of a regular pattern, and you are probably thinking back to when you were a teenager, when there was some regular use that your parents may or may not have known about. This is such an opportunity for a conversation about use, about safety, about risks, about if you end up in a situation that is uncomfortable or you don't have a drive home that's safe. Those kind of conversations are really important to have when you know your young person is using with some kind of pattern. The next level of involvement we're looking at is harmful use. And this is the part I would say we're having a lot more conversations with young people in schools and in communities. And so this is where a young person is using more often. And one of the things you're going to see with this is a young person who's starting to give up some of the things they found really helpful or that they really enjoyed before. So whether that is they used to be really interested in sports, or they used to be really interested in doing something with coding, or they used to be really into recording music. They may have had friends that they had been with for many, many years, and then their friend group has shifted. So you're looking for some specific changes that have happened related to their use, that are directly related to their use. So one of the things that I think is key here is parents know their kids the very best. And if you are finding that you're a young person who really, really valued something, and I'm going to use sports as an example. If they really, really valued sports and had always been part of a team or part of a particular sport, and that was where all their buddies came from, and you're noticing a real shift that they're no longer interested in that, those are some of the things that are really key in terms of looking at coming to a place where there's harmful use. If you had a young person who typically was pretty okay with school and attended and was willing to do their homework and their grades were okay, and you're getting a lot more of the 6 o'clock calls saying that they have skipped a class that day, or they're skipping school, or their grades are going down, those are some of the things you want to look for. If they used to love hanging out with an aunt or an uncle or grandparent and spending lots of time with family and they're starting to pull away, those are some of the keys you want to be looking for when you're looking at harmful use. Dependent use is the situation where a young person is having all of these other consequences that are happening. And in addition to that, they're experiencing withdrawal symptoms. So sometimes that looks like a hangover. They are trying to cut down and they're unsuccessful in being able to cut down. They're spending a lot of their time focused on using. So whether it is using if it's something where they are thinking about using, they're actually using, or they're recovering from using, those are some of the pieces that you want to be looking for in terms of that preoccupation with using. The things that used to be important to them are no longer important. They are getting in a lot more trouble related to their use. Those are the pieces that we're looking at when we're looking at someone who is dependently involved with alcohol or drug use. So we use these images basically to give a picture and to give you an idea of what things look like when a young person is moving towards dependent use. But again, I just want to stress that parents know their kids the very best. And if you are seeing changes in your young person's life and you are seeing personality changes, they're responding to you in different ways, trust your instincts and always trust your instincts. If you believe your young person is using something that's interfering with their life, there's a really good chance you're right. And I think the biggest mistake we can make is not trusting that instinct that we have.
Okay, so for life areas, this ties in well with speaking about levels of involvement. So what we're looking at here in this picture is sort of the big 6 of the areas that we would be looking at when we're meeting with a young person going through an assessment. So physical health, legal matters, social relationships, leisure interests, emotional, psychological health, work, volunteer, that sort of stuff, and family. So when we're meeting with young folks and we're looking at these different areas, what you're looking at right now, there will be 6 columns that you're going to be able to take a look at here. And these are the areas that we would be exploring with a young person. And this is actually a snapshot of a worksheet that many counselors use with their young clients. I'm not going to read through all the points in here, but things to sort of think about, legal-wise, getting warnings from police, maybe your friends have records, maybe you're involved with probation services, you've got charges, driving under the influence, things of that nature. Emotional health, again, Alana touched on some of these pieces. So change in behavior, mood swings, maybe some self-destructive behavior. Use appears connected with strong feelings, so anger or using when you're happy, or that's how you celebrate, or this is how you're managing being bummed out. School, so things like attendance issues, calls home, grades have gone down, maybe not engaged in class as much as they once were. So I mentioned that this would be something we'd use for working with a young person, and what we'd have them do is to go through this list of the 6 columns, and you'll see the other 3 in a few moments. But we'd get them to go through and highlight things that they've experienced, right? One of the reasons we would do this is if we were sitting across from a young person and we asked, tell us some ways that alcohol or drugs may have impacted your life. Maybe they're going to name 1 or 2 things, maybe the most recent things or something that especially stood out for them. But most likely we're going to be met with a blank stare. It's hard when we're trying to brainstorm around those things, especially things we maybe haven't really been cataloging as we're going along. So this gives a nice visual for folks. So as I said, I'm not going to read through all these statements here, but I would encourage you to spend some time thinking about which of these statements you feel your young person has experienced. Of course, there's no way you're going to know all of them, and that's okay. Just sort of keep in mind as we're going through these. When I'm thinking of this stuff, something I think of sometimes is kind of how this can make a young person look at limits or their lack of limits regarding use. Especially for someone who's sort of early on in their use, maybe they go through this entire worksheet and they only highlight a couple things and they're not really being impacted hugely by substance use. And one of the challenges with that too is even if they are being impacted quite significantly, for better or for worse, young people are unbelievably resilient. Some of the stories I hear from folks, like they binged all weekend, drinking, they're up all night, that kind of stuff, and then waking up, and able to do it the next day, whereas I might end up in the hospital if I did the exact same thing. So they can bounce back quite easily, which sometimes doesn't work in their favor because they maybe don't place the weight on those experiences as I would or as you would. So again, thinking about this in terms of a discussion of limits, one of the examples I would kind of use is imagine that you decide you're going to binge watch something on Netflix tonight. You swing by the store, you are going to buy some kind of snack. So maybe you're a salty person, maybe you're a sweet kind of person. So you go in, you grab your bag of chips, and you head home. So you start watching something on TV. Your intention is to have some chips. And then, you blink a couple times, you made it through a couple shows, and you look down and you have crushed that entire bag of chips. It is all gone. I think everyone has had this kind of experience before. We didn't intend for that to happen, but we didn't really set a clear limit and didn't do anything to sort of help us stick to that limit. And I think young people experience this all the time. So there are lots of articles and little research studies and tidbits here and there that people can find regarding setting limits. One of the things that shows up a lot is that, say I were to open that bag of chips, pour some into a bowl, put the bag of chips away. I might finish that bowl. I might even go back and go to the cupboard and refill it. But the chances of me crushing that bag of chips and finishing it all off drops significantly because I've set some kind of limit. And the thing is, too, if I go back and I end up filling it a number of times, filling that bowl a number of times, and I still finish all those chips, my relationship with that is a little bit different. I've noticed that I've done that a few times. Maybe I've had some thoughts and some doubts about what I was doing. And those are things we kind of want to encourage it with folks. Kind of a silly example to say, but how does someone know they can't drink a 2-6 of vodka? Well, because they drank half of it and got really sick, right? Sometimes good judgment comes from bad experience. Flip to the next one here. So again, moving on to the other half of this chart, so the other 3 areas. So we're looking at family, and again, I'm not going to read each one of these, but you know, arguments around use, increased tension at home, maybe some secretive nature around activities, they're late for curfew. Social, again, Alana talked about some of these, like maybe you've dropped out of some activities, you're not having the same kind of relationship with those people you did that you've had long-term friendships with. Maybe leisure has become use. This is a big thing that happens to a lot of young people when they kind of get involved a little bit more than they had planned on. And then the last section there, the physical side. You know, maybe you're looking a little bit different. Maybe you're not taking the same care of yourself. You've lost weight, you've gained weight, all those pieces that are attached to that physical health piece. One of the things I always point out to folks is that first column here, family. I'm guessing a lot of the folks on here are caregivers, and that's why they're looking at attending this group or this webinar. And I think sometimes when people start getting involved in substance use, we think that the young person doesn't care about their family at all. You know, the relationships are strained, there's a lot of fights. When we're meeting with young people, one thing that rings loud and clear for me all the time is that they do care what you think, and they often are listening to what you're saying. They are extremely reluctant to admit it to you. So when we've got them sitting in front of us, they're a lot more open with that. So the impacts in that family area are heavy for a lot of youth, and those are things that can sort of tip them into a direction of wanting to do something different. What I would highlight to folks here is in that social section, a little bit below midway down, is the statement, doing things you regret when under the influence. I feel pretty confident in saying that when I give this worksheet to someone and they're going through, whether they highlight a ton or they only highlight a couple, I feel that doing things you regret under the influence is one that almost always gets highlighted by young people. Of course, what that means can be different for all those people. For some people, it's something extremely significant that they really, really regret. You know, maybe they punched out their best friend or they got involved in some sort of criminal activity. For other folks, it might be something slightly less heavy duty. You know, maybe you sent a text that you wouldn't have sent if you were sober. Maybe someone made out with someone they wouldn't have made out with if they were sober. Maybe you lost your phone. Maybe you lost some money. Things like that, right? Again, those are things that I would like to think young people are kind of cataloging in their brain that might make them move towards doing something a little bit different. One thing I would say with this too is I've had some parents in our groups mention that when they're going through this list kind of mentally, they're going, wow, my kid is hitting lots and lots of these. And that may be true, but I would like to also acknowledge that some of the things that are on this list might just be life and growing up. Not a lot of 40-year-olds have the same circle of friends they had when they were 12, right? So maybe you're going to move into a different group of friends, and that's okay. You know, maybe a person who was really involved in school as when they were younger doesn't have the same kind of interest in it as they've grown up. Or maybe the work's become a lot more challenging for them and they're not putting the same kind of effort in, or it's just not connecting with them and their grades have gone down. Again, those are things that can be addressed, and it might not be connected to use necessarily. But again, those changes in sleep habits, young people sleep a lot or very irregular hours. And something that I would kind of attach to that is that part of these are just part of growing up in some instances. And Alana mentioned that you are the expert on your youth. You're going to know them best. You're going to see things that as a counselor I would never see. So again, trust your judgment. If you feel like something is up, whether it's alcohol or drug use, in a sense, I feel like it doesn't matter that much. If you think that your youth is losing weight or behaving very differently, or maybe they're struggling a lot at school, those are all things to address anyways. And something I've learned from working in school systems is how much youth feel like sometimes no one is noticing those things. Like a youth is walking down the hall, they reek like weed. I say something to them, but they've been at school all day and no one has mentioned it to them. So I think mentioning that, oh, you're looking a little bit down, or I've noticed you haven't been hanging out with the same circle of friends, what's going on? It shows that you're noticing those moments, and it also shows that you care and are willing to engage in that conversation. One of the things I share when I'm going through this list with young people and in groups with adults is, for me, one of the really sort of significant things that impacted me in working with a young person. I used to do a partnership with Manitoba Justice, excuse me, where I would meet with high-risk youth according to Manitoba Justice, what they defined as high-risk youth. So some of the youth I would meet with, they had very challenging histories, a lot of trauma, CFS involvement, a lot of alcohol and drug use, maybe a lot of alcohol and drug use in the family, obviously criminal justice involvement, so a lot of challenges that they're already experiencing. And I remember meeting with one youth who we had a pretty good relationship, and when he did this worksheet, he highlighted every single statement on both sides, and I had never seen that before. And this was a number of years ago, and it really shocked me. And I just said that to him. I said, I'm concerned about what's going on here. What do you think about all the different areas that are highlighted, and how much has this kind of impacted you in different ways? And he wasn't being a jerk or anything like that, but he just kind of sat there for a minute, and he was like, I don't know, I don't think much about it. I don't really know. This doesn't really impact me that much. So for me, the way I approached it was I wanted to try and get him to think a little bit about what it would be like to do something different. So the way he used was he smoked weed multiple times a day, every day for sure. He would drink a few times a week, and when he drank, he would drink as much as he could, often blacking out and things like that. And then he would sort of use whatever else was around. So he was engaging in some pretty risky behavior. So my question to him was, what would be something that would make you think about dialing it back a bit? So I'm not even talking about quitting any of those things. Just what would it be like to dial it back so maybe some of these areas weren't being lit up so much for you? And again, he thought about it for a bit, and he just said, I'm not really sure. So that was near the end of our session, and I let him off with the idea, just think about this until the next time we meet, and we'll kind of pick it up from there. So what ended up happening with this young person was he actually went AWOL shortly after that. So he stopped reporting to his probation officer. I didn't see him for probably a couple of months. He was sort of off the rails. No one knew what he was doing. Eventually, he got picked up by the police. He spent some time back in the youth center. And then by the time he got out, he'd been out in the community for a couple of weeks. I finally ended up seeing him. And the first thing he says when he walks into the office is, I cut back. And in my head, I'm thinking, okay, something on this sheet really stood out for him, really shook him, and made him want to do something different. And that wasn't exactly what happened for him. What he explained to me was that when he was out and out in the community and kind of doing his thing, he had a night where he went out with a couple buddies and a couple girls, and he had interest in one of the girls. They ended up going back to one of his friends' homes. He drinks a lot, smokes a lot, and I always forget if he took something else too, but he ended up blacking out, and then he ended up passing out. And when he came to, he'd peed himself. So he wakes up, he's urinated all over himself, his friends are making fun of him, the girl he likes wants nothing to do with him, and he ends up with a nickname out of this whole ordeal. So he gets up, walks home in his pee pants, crashes out, showers, comes to the next day and is like, okay, I really need to do something different here. That was really embarrassing for me, and that really shook me. To me, that spoke volumes, because if you look through those 6 columns that are part of the life areas chart, depending on your value system, there are some really, really significant things on there. There are many things that would have made me consider doing something different well before peeing myself in front of my friends. I'm not saying these other pieces didn't impact him or didn't act in like sort of a cumulative fashion for him, but that wasn't what he identified. So part of it is sort of based on your value system. And Alana touched on this a little bit before, that going through this man had a moment where peeing his pants was significant enough for him to think about doing things different in his life. He didn't end up quitting, but he did set limits on what he would do when he would use. So he cut out things that weren't alcohol and weed, which was a big step for him. And when he would drink, he set a limit on it. And I can't remember how much it was offhand, but it was, still more than I would have hoped, but, 6 beers a night or something like that. And he put limits on when he would use cannabis as well, right? So again, looking at these different areas, it's going to speak to values. So for me, maybe some of the legal pieces or the family pieces would have been something that would shake my value system enough that I would want to do something different. However, that wasn't his case necessarily. So what I would encourage people to think about too is when you're looking at these different statements and ones that your youth may have experienced, to sort of take into mind that this is speaking something to their value system. And something that can be really challenging is that our youth may not hold the same values as us. There's likely some core ones if they've grown up with you where you guys probably share them. But part of growing up is forming your own value system. And sometimes those things may run contrary to what the value systems of your caregivers are.
So we've looked at sort of what the levels of involvement are. We've looked at how use progresses over time, and we do know that it progresses over time. We've also looked at the variety of ways that alcohol and drug use can impact a young person's life and how we use that particular tool when we are working with young people or when we're helping families to determine how significant the issue may be for that particular young person. Now we want to shift and we want to take a look at some of the things that parents can be doing that they are 100% doing out of love and care and concern for their youth, but that can actually be enabling that problem to continue. And so this sort of chunk of the webinar, we're going to talk a little bit about what enabling is. It's a term used to refer the ways that people may, through their responses to a problem, inadvertently support its continuation. So it can be thoughts, it can be feelings, it can be attitudes or behaviors. And one of the ways that I kind of use to explain enabling, especially to families, is when we get to that point where we're taking more responsibility for the young person's actions and the young person's alcohol or drug use than they are, it's kind of that sign where we need to step back, right? As parents, we are primed to enable. The last thing any of us wants is our young person to be hurt or to miss opportunities or to be perceived in a negative way. We are trying to protect our young people. And so it is easy for us to slip into enabling. I'm going to use another really simple example. So luckily it is beautiful today. However, how many of you have been in situations with your young person, I'm guessing when they were quite a bit younger, but it also happens for teens, where you have told them numerous times to take their mitts. Take your mitts and toque. Take your mitts and toque. It's cold out. It's cold out. It's cold out. And when you see that they don't take them, you tuck them into their backpack so that they have them for recess or lunch, right? So we don't want them to be cold. We don't want them to catch a cold. So this is what we do because we are parents and we don't want to see our child hurting. There comes a point with our child that they would be like, well, why would I bother getting my mitts and toque when I know mom's going to put it in my backpack? I don't need to do that. She's got that covered, right? So it's that I'm teaching my child that they don't have to take responsibility for themselves, that they can just sort of chill out, and I will say the same thing every single morning, and they will still not take their mittens. So part of that pulling back is allowing them to face the consequence. In the situation with the mittens, they get to school one day where they can't play outside during recess the way their other buddies are, and you can be pretty much guaranteed they're not going to forget their mittens again, right? So again, that choice that I was making as a mom is very much out of love, but what it's doing is it's not allowing my child to take responsibility for themselves. I've had lots of conversations with parents over the years where they might be booking appointments for their young person or checking up on if they've come or making excuses of why they can't come or canceling appointments for them. And a lot of times when we're having that conversation, it is, let's try to engage this young person to take responsibility for their appointments or their contact with me. Allowing them to have some choice is important. Supporting them to make the choices to have involvement is really important. So when we're looking at our own behaviors, we want to be taking a look at what are we doing, and this is really tough. What are we doing as parents that may be contributing to the use? What are some of my thoughts, feelings, and attitudes? What are some of my behaviors that might be contributing to my young person using? And I know this part of the group is often a part where parents kind of feel a little bit on the spot. So I'm going to kind of give you a couple of examples of ways that parents can enable. Sometimes it is buying alcohol or cannabis for their young person. They want to make sure so they're thinking behind it. So they want to make sure they have safe access. I know what's in it. So I'm going to provide it for them. I'm going to allow them to use it home because then I know that they're okay. Sometimes that action can be enabling them to continue to use because why would they consider stopping if it's a very easy thing for them to do that their perception is it's very accepted in their home to be able to do it. If we have ideas that, well, it's the only, using cannabis is the only way my young person can cope with their anxiety, it's the only thing that seems to be able to work. Times where you're doubting yourself, I might be overreacting, well, at least it's not heroin, it's not as bad as so-and-so down the street, maybe it's not that big a deal, they'll grow out of it, right? Those situations where we are doubting ourselves. Situations where we avoid things, like not following through on consequences. If we made something really clear in terms of, if this happens, here's going to be the consequence attached to that, and then we don't follow through on it. If we give in situations just to avoid having a conflict with our young person, that sometimes can be seen as enabling. Calling them in sick to school or to work because they were out using late or they didn't come home. We're making an excuse for them so they don't get an absence at school. Money is always a big piece, right? Is providing money for cell phones or other particular debts when they run out of money. When they have a job or they have access to money and you're unsure where that money is. So it's paying their debts. When they have gone through the money that they actually have. Making excuses to other family members, so saying, oh, they can't come to Thanksgiving dinner because they've got the stomach flu, rather than sort of acknowledging what is actually going on. Blaming can be a way that we enable, where it's, oh, it's the friends that he or she is hanging out with, the teacher or the coach is too tough on him or her. It's peer pressure, all of those sort of pieces where we're blaming the action on someone else, or minimizing the experience as well. Like it's only beer, everyone's doing it, I'm just a teenager. So looking at, are there things, and this is a tough question, but are there things that I might be doing that are supporting my young person continuing to use? Are there ways that I can approach this differently that helps them to see that there might be an issue with this? And when we look at the reasons why young people, why parents are enabling, number one is always related to love and concern for our young person. We don't want them to be hurt. We don't want anything bad to happen to them. We don't want them to miss out on being able to graduate on time or any of those different types of things. We might be in denial at times about what's going on. Sometimes we see where one parent may not see what's going on and the other one sees it very differently. Sometimes we enable because we are exhausted, that there's so much energy going into what's going on with the young person's use that we're just tired, and it's easier to kind of just let it go and not address it. Sometimes we enable because we're frustrated, we're unsure what to do next, our cup is empty, we're angry, we're frustrated. Parents often will feel responsible. If I had done this differently, or if this situation hadn't happened, or if I had caught this sooner, taking responsibility for things that had happened in the past as being contributing factors to what was going on right now. And sometimes parents will enable just to avoid the situation. I don't want to deal with it. I don't know how to deal with it. If I call it out, then it means I need to do something about it. I think one of the other pieces to look at when we're looking at enabling is not just what happens in our homes, but looking at what systems enable. And so looking at things like schools, for example, like sports teams, like the legal system. Are there ways that some of those systems are in place that also support enabling a young person to continue to make choices that may not be awesome for them long term? Right? And I think it's important to recognize we don't all live in a vacuum. All of our young people are part of those systems as well. And how might they be contributing to that young person continuing to make choices that may be harmful to them?
So a few principles I'd like people to hold in mind when they're thinking about working with their young person. Things we are responsible for and things we are not responsible for. I think this is a good discussion to hit after enabling. So things you are responsible for, you're responsible for your youth's environment, like a roof over their head, food, a nurturing, safe place, those basic needs. If we're doing that stuff, yeah, we're meeting those needs. We're doing our job. We also are responsible for our own feelings and behaviors. And with that comes modeling. And that can be really challenging. So what our behaviors are, what our actions are, our lifestyle, right? I know often we don't feel like it, but parents are one of our children's strongest influences. Even though sometimes they don't want to let us know that, the caregivers and parents are a strong influence even if we don't feel it. Your children notice how you deal with problems, how you express your feelings, how you handle stress, how you celebrate special occasions, how we interact with our partners. So we need to be aware of how we model. Like if we're wearing a cannabis hat or something like that, it's saying something about our value system, and a young person is picking up on that. Also, if we, the language that we use, right? This isn't just limited to alcohol and drug use conversations. If, we make fun of people with mental health issues, or we say, well, people that try suicide are just weak, or make fun of people with cognitive issues, our young people pick up on those things and they recognize that you're not a safe person to have that kind of conversation with, right? So you're going to limit the kind of things that person's willing to talk to you about. And one other piece to sort of bear in mind about what we're responsible for is that children will often adopt many of our values and behaviors. So just like you were influenced by your family unit or your parents, your youth are going to be influenced by you. So we tend to recreate things that we know. And I'm sure people have had this experience before where, you're talking to your kid or you kind of get frustrated and all of a sudden the dad voice comes out or the mom voice comes out and you're like, oh my God, I sound exactly like my parents. But we are going to inherit some of those pieces just based off the sort of socialization that we've gone through. Those things are changeable, right? So if we can kind of recognize some of our behaviors and work to make them, tweak them to a way that's maybe going to allow that young person to be a little bit more receptive to some of our interventions, that'd be a great thing. Things that we are not responsible for are another person's feelings or their behaviors or their consequences, right? So part of growing up is learning to manage our feelings in healthy and mature ways. We need to provide young people with opportunities to experience that. By enabling, we're essentially robbing them of the chance to grow and chance to learn to do something a little bit different and a chance to be the responsible person that we hope them to be.
So when we're looking at enabling and we're challenging ourselves and we're questioning ourselves, which is sometimes really tough to do, some of the things we want to consider is like, why am I enabling? What is my motive? What am I worried about? What am I trying to do by some of my enabling behaviors? Am I comfortable with some of the responses I've given or I've thought about giving to my young person? Do they feel okay for me? It is going to look really, really different in each home in terms of how a young person is responded to related to their alcohol and drug use. And I think as parents, what is so important is that we are challenging ourselves to figure out something that makes the most sense for our family, right? And so asking ourselves these questions about what might I be doing to contributing to this, and what might I be willing to consider doing differently? What would that look like? Those are some of the big questions that we need to be asking ourselves. And as we're looking at, okay, I'm going to try to look at doing things a little bit differently, or I'm going to test out some new ways of handling things with my young person where I'm not enabling as clearly. One of the things to remember if you're considering making this change is that you have always been, as a parent, we don't always get the best part of our kids, so you have been seen as the provoker, the one to push all the buttons, you have been seen as the victim, or you've been seen as the rescuer to your young person. So if you shift some of the ways that you are interacting with your young person, there is a darn good chance they're going to get pretty angry and frustrated, and they're going to be uncertain about what your responses are. So making sure that you don't take their anger personally. So it's kind of an example of it would be standing still while a teenager throws garbage at you, and so instead of doing that, you just step it out of the way and let it hit the wall. Right? So again, when we talked earlier about making sure that we're taking care of ourselves, that's going to take a lot of energy for us to just let them be angry and not respond because we've done something to sort of change how we're responding to them. Try to avoid confrontations when emotions are elevated. And I think this is something that we can do sometimes easier in work situations, right? We kind of have our work hats and our home hats, but making sure that we're in tune with how we're feeling. It is important, though, as well for us to let our young person know how we feel. we are modeling us taking responsibility for our feelings, right? And explain sometimes that, hey, mom needs a timeout. This has happened. I'm feeling really angry and frustrated. I need some time to think about it before I can talk with you about it. If I'm doing that, though, I want to be really clear with my young person of this conversation isn't over. So it may be, I need the night to think about it. We'll talk tomorrow morning. Or I'm going to go for a walk, and when I come back, let's chat about it. So I want to kind of give them a time frame that we're going to come back and chat about this, so it's not left with something just hanging in our home and in our relationship. Be mindful of saying things you don't mean or things you can't enforce. And when we slip into this, and we all, I'm sure, have done it as parents, we lose credibility and our words don't count for as much. So this piece is really important that we pay attention to. So saying really harsh things like, I wish you would go live with your grandma, or I should have let you go live with your grandma instead of being here, or I'm going to take away your phone for the next 6 months. The phone is often one of the tools that's used for consequences with young people, and sometimes it works really effectively, but a lot of times I'll hear from parents about, but now I have no way of getting in touch with them or communicating with them, me, and that makes me feel anxious. So just being careful of the things that you're saying, making sure that when you're saying something, you mean it, and it's something that you can enforce. Obviously, we never want to use violence or any kind of verbal attacks. We all know that our buttons can be pushed. We are human like everybody else, even though we're parents and caregivers, right? So we want to make sure that we're able to keep our anger in check and make sure that we're able to get ourselves out of the situation to a situation where we can cool down. We want to not nag our teenager or remind them of the effects of their alcohol and drug use. Take a stand, for sure. Tell the young person about your concerns. You want to keep that communication open, and you want to express your feelings about what's going on, but don't nag. And being careful not to make the alcohol and drug use the central point of your conversations with your young person. My guess is your young person is also doing lots of really awesome things. Might be taking a younger sibling to 7-Eleven to get a Slurpee, or might be playing with a younger sibling, might have helped with grandma's lawn raking. So my guess is your young person is also doing other things, making sure to focus on those pieces as well, because that piece is important. We don't want all of the focus to just be on the young person's alcohol and drug use. Don't clean up your teenager's messes. So this is tough for parents to kind of step back from, but if your teenager ends up with a fine or ends up with a ticket, making sure that you are not the one that's paying the fine, making sure that they're taking responsibility. If your young person messed up and didn't hand in an assignment that was worth a fair amount, not making any excuses for that young person with their teacher, letting them take responsibility for what has happened and to work towards rectifying it. If there is damage done in your home or to your car or anything, any other kind of property that belongs to anyone else, making sure that that young person is making the game plan to be able to pay that person back or fix the damage that has been made. So it's making sure that they have an opportunity to take responsibility for their actions. And this is this piece is really key because young people at this stage in their life, one of their main tasks is learning the connection between what we do and what happens to us, right? So we know that for each of us who are here today, if we take certain actions, there's consequences for us. There's things we need to fix or alter or do things about. We want to make sure that we have opportunities to teach those things to our young people as well. Not making excuses to family or friends about a young person's alcohol or drug use. That piece is important. It's okay to call it for what it is. It's okay, especially with family and friends, to be able to let them know what's going on so that you are also able to get some support from them. This isn't something where you want to be having to tackle it all on your own. And don't use a parenting technique that makes your child feel insecure. So these are some of the things like if this continues, or if you come home again under the influence, Or if you drive under the influence again, I'm going to put you into a foster home or a group home, or you're not going to be part of this family anymore. I know that we can feel that way sometimes, but it's also keeping in mind, we started the session today talking about the value of connection with young people. We need to, in what our responses are to young people, we need to make sure that we are keeping that connection clear. We're making that connection feel secure, and regardless of any bonehead decisions they may be making, that they are still attached to us. They are still communicating with us, even though they might say that they hate us on a particular day, recognizing that mom and dad are solid and they're there regardless of what I do, right? So we don't want to do anything that makes them feel insecure, because again, that perception, their perception of what's going on is, well, if I have no one, if I don't even have my parents anymore, what would be the point, or how would I be successful in making any changes?
Okay, so we're going to move on to stages of change. My guess is that a lot of folks out there have heard of the stages of change or have some idea of it. But before we jump into that, just a few things I wanted to point out to folks about change as a concept. We've talked a little bit about this already, but change is not easy. It's not easy for you, and it's not going to be easy for your youth either. Change is a process of small steps and choices, and a lot of times it is 1 step forward, 2 steps back, or 5 steps back. It is definitely not a straight line, and it is not a one-time event. For a lot of folks, it takes many kicks at the can to get this done. We can't force someone to change. It's something that they're going to need to do for themselves. Having said that, we do have influence. Okay, and that's what we're talking about a lot here. People change when they're able to acknowledge that there is an issue or a problem. They are able to recognize that they have some choice, and they feel able to act on their own decisions. Folks need to feel safe and supported during change, and limits, consequences, choices, and encouragement are key factors in increasing the chance for change to happen. One of the themes I always keep in mind is that change rarely comes from a place of comfort. Okay? So bringing your attention to this graph in front of you guys right now, we're going to start that pre-contemplation part, kind of like the 3 o'clock, 4 o'clock part there. So pre-contemplation, this is where an individual does not see their behavior as an issue or as a problem. They're not interested in discussing any of the issues attached to that behavior with those who are identifying as a problem. They've got no intention of changing. Some folks might describe people in this stage as resistant, ambivalent. Often the person is unaware of risks, or if they are aware of some risks, they rationalize them away in some form or another. Okay? So moving down to the 6 o'clock position there, we're talking about contemplation. Person in this stage of change, they've got some awareness that they might need to change their behavior. They're realizing some risks attached to it. Maybe they're actively weighing those pros and cons. They've got some awareness of the need for change. This is sort of that decisional balancing portion, not unlike the life areas chart, where you're looking at what's kind of good about this, what's bad about this. So even though they might be able to identify those two different things, they might still be wavering in their willingness to change. So preparation, this is that planning stage. So the person recognizes that the behavior can be changed, and they're planning, they've got some kind of commitment to it, to attempting that change. They see benefit in doing something differently. Action, that's just like it sounds. So they are in it. They've begun to make that behavior change. They're trying it out. They're testing the waters. This could be the first day that someone is doing something different or attempting something different. This could be 6 months into it, right? They've expressed that commitment to change, and they generally have a plan. Maintenance, that new behavior has been established, that new lifestyle has been established somewhat. Maybe you think of your old behavior, your old friends, your old habits, but you're becoming more confident in your choices and in that change. One thing that is running around the whole outside there is that recycle part. It's important to recognize that that can happen at any stage. People can jump back to different points in this. It's not that one-time process. It's not that straight line. It can jump all over the place. Some people can be stuck with that. They can have a hard time moving forwards. They might recycle backwards, and they can get stuck in a stage. When we're running through this quickly, I think it sort of seems like each one of these builds on the other and that it's very straightforward. It is not. Some people can be stuck in one of these stages for a really long time, years in some cases, and that can be very, very challenging for us as outsiders watching this happen. Something also to keep in mind is that when we're applying this concept to alcohol and drug use, people can be at a different stage of change for different substances. So not unlike the guy that I spoke about when we were talking about those life areas who had the pants pissing moments, he didn't want to quit marijuana and he didn't want to quit drinking. He was okay with quitting some of the other substances, so he moved through those, but he was still stuck in those other places where maybe he dialed it back and put some limits, but he was in no way going to quit those things. Maybe that's changed now, but that wasn't where he was at then. Okay, so we already talked about these different stages, and I gave you guys a little bit of a snapshot of what those stages are like. So I think this is a great diagram where it shows a visual of what those stages might be like. You're sitting on the floor, you've got no interest in doing anything different, you are not interested in those stairs. Nope, the idea of climbing those stairs has popped into your head. Maybe there's some benefit to doing this. You're standing up, you can visualize that you are going to do this. Moved on to action, you are in the midst of it, you're doing it. Maintenance, you're climbing those stairs. You've made this change and it's going to last for a while. Okay. When we're thinking about this stuff and we're talking about change, things I'd like people to keep in mind are, think of a time when you made a change or you thought of a change. Alana talked about this a little bit before. Maybe you thought about changing your jobs. Maybe you did change your job. Maybe you ended a relationship. Maybe you tried to start a relationship. Maybe you thought about losing some weight. Maybe you quitting smoking. Maybe you're going to move. When you think back over your life, was this a one-time event? Did it take you a lot of tries to do this? What were the things that were helpful for you? What made you stuck? What left you in that behavior? Are you still stuck? And again, what helped, right? So when we recognize how challenging it is to change ourselves and all the barriers and difficulties we might experience, we can recognize how nearly impossible it is to change another person. They need to be on board for this. So we can be that supportive person, but we definitely can't do it for them.
So this is the part where I show a slide that says self-care. And some of you start to groan or roll your eyes or that sort of piece, and you are thinking, oh my goodness, they're going to make us do homework. And you are absolutely right. That is exactly what we're going to ask you to do. One of the threads that has sort of gone through this entire presentation is the incredible position you're in as a parent or a caregiver. To be able to influence change. And you are going to be the dartboard in a lot of situations where your young person is targeting a lot of things at you, is putting a lot of their anger and their frustration at you, and of course you don't know anything, and this is all hard. This is all really, really hard work. And as parents and givers, we're very, very focused on others. That's how we roll, right? There is no one more important to us than our children. And it is very, very easy to put them first. But one of the things that's also important is that the needs of parents are as important as the needs of their children. If we are taking care of ourselves, we are in a much better position to be able to help our young people. And again, when I talked earlier about this isn't a sprint, this is a marathon, we need to make sure that we're taking care of ourselves. Sometimes I'll hear parents talk about, like, once we get through this or once this is done, I'll totally take some time for myself. I'll go to the spa, we're going to go on a vacation, I'll do something, right? Self-care isn't about doing something when we have a chance. Self-care is about doing things every day so our cup doesn't get empty. When my cup is empty, it's kind of too late for self-care because I'm exhausted, I'm frustrated, I'm probably isolated from my supports at that point because I have given everything I've got and I've got nothing left for myself. So my challenge that I'm putting out to you guys is that over the next couple of days, as we wait to do part 2 of this webinar, really challenging you guys to think about what can I be doing to take care of myself through this, because what I'm doing is really hard work. And I want what I'm choosing to do for myself, what I'm choosing to do for my self-care, to be very purposeful and intentional. Not just, oh yeah, got 10 minutes here, I'm going to slip something in. Being very intentional about taking times for ourselves. And that's going to look different for every parent, right? It could be I'm going to watch a show on Netflix. It could be I'm going to read something. I'm going to take a bath. I'm going to get to chat with one of my best friends. I'm going to go for a walk. I'm going to go to the gym. I'm going to buy myself something new. Whatever that is for you, where you are filling your cup up is really, really important. When we do this group in the community, it's always a piece that we end our first night with, is challenging parents to do something to take care of themselves. This information that we've shared is kind of heavy and very challenging for lots of families, so we want to make sure that we're balancing that with the importance of self-care. So we really look forward to seeing all of you in part 2 of the webinar, and we really look forward to having all of you part of our webinar next week. So make sure you check back to the email you came from, or the AFM Facebook page, or the school division sites, because it'll have the second link for next week's webinar. We'd love to have you part of it.
Thank you very much for participating, guys.
Thank you.